This is the web transmission service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. At our Military History Night of May the 19th, retired RCAF Captain Mort Lightstone discussed his and his aircrew's harrowing adventure in Vietnam during the final throes of the Vietnam War in 1973 and the intriguing goings-on in Bangkok that followed.
Here's a quick agenda of what I'll be talking about. Just a few words about French Indochina, a few words about when the U.S. went into Vietnam, the Paris Peace Accords, which were hammered out in the city of Paris, the role that the Canadian Air Force Squadron 436 played in the Paris Peace Accords, specifically the use of one C-130 Hercules, but more fascinatingly, the great snafu that our federal government organized.
Okay, Mort, let me just say a few words now.
Okay, I'm sorry, Pat.
That's all right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Patricia Hine-White, and I organize this event. Welcome to RCMI's virtual Military History Night, Wednesday, May the 19th, 2021. This presentation will be videotaped for educational purposes and available for viewing on RCMI YouTube channel. I believe now you have muted your mics and camera and ask you to hold your questions till the end of the presentation. I would like to extend a sincere thank you to our dedicated RCMI behind the scenes team of RCMI President Mike Hall, General Manager Garrett Wright, Sylvia Lau, Event Sales Manager and in-house Zoom expert, Jim Lutz, Events Committee Chair, Eric Morse, Editor of RCMI Members News, Director Publications, Member of RCMI Strategic Studies Committee, and producer of the RCMI videos for their strong support and expertise. Guest speaker this evening is Captain Retired Mort Lightstone, RCAF, topic, Escaping Death in Vietnam. Our speaker served 28 years in the RCAF as a global celestial navigator, acquiring 6,600 hours on operations and missions, and saw action in the Korean War, the Cold War, and the Vietnam War, and has related his story as co-author of best-selling book Everyday Heroes, published October 2017 by Simon & Schuster and edited by Judy Mittish. Tonight, Mort will, in a first-hand account, share his story of international intrigue, abandonment, cunning spies, hunger, a daring escape plan, and how he saved the lives of his C-130 Hercules crew in the final days of the Vietnam War. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, welcome, Mort. Over to you. I'm virtually speaking. The floor is yours.
Okay, I hope everybody can hear me. I'm going to proceed on the assumption that you can. I've already talked about our agenda for this presentation. When the French colonized what at that time was referred to as French Indochina, they were up against the enemy known as the Viet Minh. One of the treasures that the Viet Minh developed with regards to fighting a clandestine war was the ability to take apart a small ammunition factory and put it on bicycles and move it as close to the front as possible and reassemble it. So the shortest lines possible between the prepared ammunition or hand grenades and the users was one of their significant tools. This is a typical fort, one of the French forts. It was located at Tan Son Nhut, which happens to be the heart of the story that you're going to hear in a few moments. This is what it looked like by the time the Viet Minh had finished attacking the fort. That particular fort is located in the west part of Tan Son Nhut, and subsequent to their control of what was then French Indochina, the location expanded. They built an airport. And I want to show you within the red circles the density of the buildings in the United States Air Force Base, Tan Son Nhut. So this was the last day of the French control of French Indochina. Their last effort was to do a paradrop of a division, an army division. Prior to that, there were battles raging around a place called Dien Bien Phu. And Canadians of my generation at that time, the early 50s, we knew Dien Bien Phu like the youth of today know Hamas and the Gaza and so on, and their rockets. But that division missed their target when they jumped, and they were all captured without firing a shot, and that was the end of the French and the opportunity for the Americans to move in, which they did, and they came in strength. Here's a great photo of the US cavalry arriving. So they had all these new shiny planes, and they got new helmets and great carbine rifles and armored vests and jungle boots. And they got new barracks built for them. So they were pretty happy. They built a new headquarters building. They anticipated a lot of activity. So it was a very large building. And you can see the fortifications that they built to protect that building. They also built a number of dining halls. And this is an interesting scene because it shows first the density of the buildings on an active military base. And remember the Viet Cong, don't let me get ahead of myself. One of the things I want to show you in this photograph is this building. It's the base exchange, the BX. Any of you who are ex-military have been on American bases and Canadian bases. We all have a BX. The base exchange, they exchange your money for their goods. They sell cigarettes, liquor, jewelry, cameras, you name it, they've got it. It's the only building in the picture that has the initials carved on the roof. Can you see in this picture the letters BX? This is the passenger terminal at Tan Son Nhut. It's interesting because at that time, the early and mid 60s, it was the busiest airport in the world. Now I'm going to make a small request. I'm going to ask all of you to remember the woman in white. I think you can see the woman in white. She sort of stands out. So please remember the woman in white. Didn't take long until the Americans realized that the Viet Cong had the ability to come up through tunnels and attack targets of opportunity. It was a thorn in the side of the Americans because they could do this anywhere in Vietnam. Here's a photograph of a grandmother, a mother, a daughter, and a granddaughter. A few minutes prior to this picture being taken, they were working in a rice paddy when a South Vietnamese Army patrol came marching along, and on the other side of the paddy, the Viet Cong appeared through tunnels or what have you, and a firefight started. And of course, when you're that close to the enemy, when the fighting is literally in your backyard, there's the human tragedy that happens. Collateral damage cannot be avoided. And homes are destroyed, whole villages are destroyed, parts of the industrial base, highways, communication nodes, that was a given. So the Americans thought, all we have to do is fire a few rounds of ammunition. That'll be the end of the Viet Cong. Well, that didn't work. So they tried dropping napalm bombs and burning them out. That didn't work. Well, then let's deny them the use of the coverage of the jungles by dropping Agent Orange. Agent Orange is in deep in the ground now. They drop so much of it. It's in the food chain. I read recently that 100,000 babies die every year from Agent Orange. Hard to believe. Then the Americans started carrying off their dead, one by one, and then 10 by 10, by 100. And eventually they asked why. And the answer is to stop the spread of communism and to allow the people of Vietnam to live a peaceful and generous democratic way of life. Well, I wonder, is this fellow so intent on living that lifestyle? The death rate became so high, the casualty rates just went out of sight. Eventually, the Americans started meeting with the Viet Cong and suing for peace, literally suing for peace. They met in the International Center in Paris, in this gorgeous room with that magnificent chandelier. But you notice there wasn't too much interest in this meeting. They couldn't fill the chairs behind the American delegation, which is on the, I think that's the right-hand side of your screen. No, the left-hand side of your screen. And yet the Viet Cong had a lot of representatives there. And they met a few times, and then they got locked in some dispute over something. And then this chap, Henry Kissinger, the Secretary of State from the United States, shuttled over to Paris, helped them resolve the issue, and he shuttled back to the US. And they kept meeting, and they came against the brick wall again. So he shuttled back and forth, and shuttle diplomacy was born. And on January 27th, 1973, they had finally agreed on the last detail of many thousands of details. And altogether, they're known as the Paris Peace Accords. Paris Peace Accords and this discussion, remember, started on May 13th, 1968. It took just a few months short of 5 years to bring about the Paris Peace Accords. Now I want to jump to that same day, a little later, 1400 Greenwich Mean Time, 9 o'clock local time in Ontario. My daughter Helen, who's one of the participants this evening, and my son Steve were playing in the snow. We were going to go tobogganing, but that was disrupted by a phone call. I was ordered out to the base and leaving immediately on a mission. I asked, where are we going? They said, Vietnam. I couldn't believe it, especially with literally no prior notice that we'd be off to Vietnam. Our wheels were up at 1800 GMT. That was 4 hours later than that phone call. That's me in the red circle. We had a double crew, 4 pilots, 2 navigators, 2 flight engineers, 4 loadmasters, a couple of other guys, and this fellow, an Army major. He was in fact a Jimmy. And those of you who have dealt with the Army know that a Jimmy is somebody that's in the Signal Corps. He was the guard and escorting some top secret communications gear for the Canadian part of the International Control and Supervisory Commission. This gentleman, Major Dave Watson, he was our aircraft commander and our mission commander. One thing for certain, our crew was top heavy with officers. It came to haunt us a little later, but our airmen served us well because they had extra chores in the days ahead that was not expected. And without them, we probably would not have survived. And I'll cover that in a moment. Our orders were to make speed to the U.S. Air Force Base in Tan Son Nhut, to offload the top secret communications equipment and to offload the 1 Jimmy escort. By the way, I didn't mention when I showed you the escort, his briefcase was bulging, and he bragged about having a loaded revolver in that brown briefcase. On board, we had a very pistol and a shotgun somewhere in our survival gear, and that was our armament. Okay, so get to Tan Son Nhut as fast as you can. Get rid of the Jimmy and the communications gear, refuel and leave Vietnam within 4 hours. Now, these details were part of the Paris Peace Accord. Important to know that. Next detail is not of a concern to the Paris Peace Accord, but we were to depart for Hong Kong. Hey, what a trade-off. Stay in Vietnam, go to Hong Kong. Stay in Vietnam, go to Hong Kong. We're ready to go to Hong Kong. Well, our flight planning told us, first of all, to go from Canadian Forces Base Trenton to United States Air Force Tan Son Nhut. We have to go over the pole and down through Russia and through Cambodia. I don't think those countries would welcome that. So the route we took was from Trenton to Edmonton. We landed, refueled, changed crews. Next stop was in Anchorage, Alaska. We landed, refueled, changed crews. Then to Shemya and the Aleutians, and the same routine. And then from Shemya, we flew to Nagoya in Japan. Now, this was a very interesting leg because we crossed the international date line. Going in that direction from east to west, local time changes immediately to tomorrow. So if we're walking along that line and using our watches, our local time, it would be Tuesday. As soon as we cross the line, it's Wednesday. Interesting point. The next leg was finally to Tan Son Nhut. Tan Son Nhut is located near Saigon in the south part of Vietnam. And now these Paris Peace Accords, how are they to be implemented? They were to be implemented by what they called the International Commission of Control and Supervision, the ICCS. The ICCS was comprised of 4 countries, 2 communist countries, Hungary and Poland, 2 non-communist countries, Canada and Indonesia, each with 200 military personnel on those teams. And the Paris Peace Accords were to be implemented, monitored, tested, etc., by this group, by the ICCS. Every conceivable need was accounted for. So, in addition to that, and as part of the Paris Peace Accord, all 4 countries were totally self-contained. They had their own doctors, their own cooks, their own military police, admin staff, photographers, analyzers, etc. They even had helicopters. I don't know if each of the teams had the helicopters, but I hope you can see on your screens that it's clearly marked on that aircraft ICCS. They each had an Nhut like this, in close proximity to each other at Tan Son Nhut. They had other accommodations and buildings around Vietnam as they implemented parts of the accords in those areas. So the whole question is, has everybody entered the Paris Peace Accords in good faith? This is the Stars and Stripes. Most of the military people in the room have seen the Stars and Stripes. It's a military newspaper that follows the troops around the world. This was the first issue after signing the Paris Peace Accords, and you can see the blazing headline in large print. It's all over, folks. Well, look at this headline on the same page. Truce hour arrives. Attacks raging. Not sporadic. Not looking for them. They're raging. But Daddy's coming home, and the American people are happy about that. Before I leave this subject, this is today's Stars and Stripes, the front page. I've circled the date, Wednesday, May 19th, 2021. And I don't know if you can see the pointer here. It's 50 cents and free to deployed areas. Finally, we're flying over Tan Son Nhut. Had our first look at the dispersal area. Lots of aircraft, a lot of multi-engine aircraft, a few fighters, but certainly a cluttered tarmac. We were looking forward to landing and getting off the aircraft, getting off our Hercules and smelling the air of Vietnam, this war that's been a war zone for so many years. And especially the part that we had to be out as quickly as possible. We figured we'd be out in an hour. And then we'd be in Hong Kong and life would be changed and we'd have to wait until we get further orders. That could take weeks. How awful to put a crew in the heart of Hong Kong for 4 weeks and not know when you're leaving. How awful, or how much fun. But we didn't realize that in 10 or 20 minutes, we're going to be entering a black abyss. We're going to sink to the bottom. It's going to be a case of abandonment. We'll experience hunger. We have to use our cunning to survive. We're going to be involved in international intrigue. We already are. We're going to have to develop a daring escape plan. And we're going to be involved with spies. All unknown 10 minutes ago. Let's see what happened. Oh my God, how shocking. The Viet Cong knew exactly where we were going to park. They knew exactly what time we would arrive. They knew exactly how much time we had, 4 hours. They knew all they had to do was throw some bandoliers up and around over the cockpit and blow the cockpit off, and it becomes 80,000 pounds of scrap metal. There was a problem. It immediately developed. And the problem was the Viet Cong had the wrong day. They forgot we're crossing the international date line. They blew up that Herc the day before. We were put on a bus and driven over to base operations. Major Dave Watson was escorted into the back room where they have all this secret teletype and that stuff. And then he came out to see us. When he told us that Canada is really worried, then he was called back into base ops. And I can't remember the sequence of the events that followed, but this is what happened over the next 10 minutes, 10 to 20 minutes. Sorry about the sore throat. The cabinet takes control of the aircraft and the crew. National Defense Headquarters no longer is issuing orders. The cabinet ordered us to stay at Tan Son Nhut until directed to leave. Remember, after 4 hours, we're in violation of the Paris Peace Accords. We were ordered to wear civvies. Wear civvies in a war zone. Who ever heard of that? By the way, Prime Minister at the time was Justin Trudeau, Trudeau the Senior. We were certainly a target of opportunity. The Viet Cong proved that the day before. And we learned 15 years later that we were exposed to Agent Orange. Well, we decided to go and see the Canadian contingent at the ICCS. They immediately said, no cooperation, no food, no accommodation, And we'd appreciate it if you leave our grounds immediately. They didn't want us anywhere near the place. They told us the Hungarians and the Poles were already counting heads. So we went to the United States Air Force billeting office. Same thing, no cooperation, no food, no accommodation unless you're listed in the Paris Peace Accords for that specific event, which of course we weren't. We felt abandoned. Had nowhere to go. We were in civvies. We wouldn't dare leave the base. We'd never get back on. We were very concerned. Remember I said earlier we were top heavy of officers? You cannot imagine the number of suggestions that came out from the 5 of us. 6 of us. The Jimmy decided to stay with us because he also ran into a problem. There was yelling and screaming, and I wouldn't have believed they were in fact military officers. But bottom line was we decided we had to go and see this guy, Colonel Glenn Jones. That's his title, but in our military terms, we'd call him the base operations officer. He had the responsibility of shuttling thousands of troops back home by air, by ship, and so on. He's blowing up ammunition, determining what tanks and trucks were to be shipped back, which ones were to be destroyed in Vietnam, and so on. He stood his grounds. He cannot help us unless we're asking for something that's covered by the Paris Peace Accords. He was terse with everyone. We went to see him as a group twice. After the second meeting with Colonel Jones, Dave Watson took me aside and he said he noticed that when Colonel Jones answered my questions, pardon me, he was a little more sympathetic. He said, Dave Watson asked me to go and see Colonel Jones on my own. We had a nice little chat, and surprisingly enough, I felt we were new friends. Then he advised me, mind you, all the time we all knew that we had to use cunning to survive now. We had a problem, where are we going to get food? Where are we going to stay overnight? A few chaps suggested we sleep in the aircraft. No way would I sleep in that aircraft with the Viet Cong around. But Jones told me about in the old French section of Tan Son Nhut. The Americans are not using the buildings that are there. They've been taken over by semi-squatters. Those South Vietnamese are really workers that are employed on the base. He mentioned that there's a guardhouse, an old guardhouse, and that's what we should move into. This is the area where the guardhouse is. Jones said that he understood the ladies in the neighborhood use the shower room of that guardhouse as a laundry. I don't have any photographs of that guardhouse, but this is another scene of the general area. If you're not familiar with this photograph, it's the cargo compartment of the C-130 Hercules. Everything that you see in red becomes seating. We try to rationalize what's going on. Why are they holding us there? What's the cabinet got in mind? And the best answer we could come up with and have all officers agree on it was we'd evacuate all the Canadians that are attached to the ICCS. The problem is there were 200 souls. If we open up all this red seating, which would include 2 rows right up the center of the aircraft, we could seat 100. It would call for 2 trips, and there's no way the Viet Cong would let us come back for a second time. So our plan, we had to be ingenious and come up with a daring escape plan. Our escape plan was to put ropes and chains laterally across the aircraft at waist height, every 2 feet apart, and tie the 200 people to those ropes and chains. We knew that on takeoff, they would all lose their footing and probably would still be tumbling when we land at wherever we go to. But it was the best idea we could come up with. And just to put it into perspective, this is what the seating's like when those 2 center rows are up. Can you imagine every person you see in this picture has to be replaced by 2 people in order to conduct that plan of escape and rescue all of our people that are legitimately on the ICCS. But we never had to implement that plan. In fact, orders came through. Orders came through to deploy to Bangkok. Took us roughly 3 minutes to pack and get over to base ops, get a weather briefing. I wanted to say goodbye to Glenn Jones. He helped us find some food. He gave us that accommodation, which was awful, but better than nothing. I found some yellow foolscap because he was out blowing up some ammunition and things. And I wrote a quick note to him. Pardon me. Where I said, we're leaving this morning. Thank you for taking care of us and being so gracious. And please accept as a small token of our appreciation the enclosed Canadian Armed Forces Navigators Wings as a small token of our appreciation. Of course, they were my wings taken right off my flying suit. Ended up by saying in this lower paragraph, it is my thought that peace will never come as a result of fear of war, but rather only as a result of a love of peace. Good luck, Mort Lightstone, Captain. Well, on to Bangkok. About 525 miles, a 1.5 hour flight. And when we landed in Bangkok, we were met by staff from the Canadian Embassy. They gave us thousands of dollars and several cases of liquor, with the rider that if we want more of either, we can have all we want, just phone the embassy. I didn't realize it until a couple of years later that there was something behind that, and you'll see why in a moment. But our life certainly changed. We booked into the hotel. There's one room for each of us. They were air conditioned. We had our own showers, and more significantly, our own toilets. Plus, Bangkok has a wonderful nightlife. In my idle hours, while we waited through several days, I saw this group of pagodas in the Royal Palace in Bangkok, and I drew this little sketch. This lady was the front desk lady. The hotel was the New Nana, which is still in business today under that name. And if you can see their roadside sign through the little archway there, and you might be able to make out the word Nana. So that's the New Nana Hotel. And our first night was spent, of course, going to bed as early as possible, but we had caught our breath by breakfast time. And that's when we discovered that the New Nana Hotel was the epic center of military intelligence and espionage in the Orient. There was between 60 and 80 lieutenant colonels from many nations there, all with stuffed pockets, stuffed with money, and all willing to chat with anyone because they had received instructions from their respective governments to listen for this kind of information, or here's some information that you can let slip. And here we are loaded with all this liquor and lots of money. We asked the hotel if we could throw a cocktail party every evening before dinner. We'll provide the liquor, you provide the soft drinks and munchies. And so we met many of them. It was a fascinating experience. However, the situation was in South Vietnam was deteriorating rapidly. It was utter chaos everywhere. The Americans soon offered to take those American citizens and South Vietnamese citizens who were helping the Americans to take them away to America. There were helicopters provided. They rushed, if they were nominated to go, they rushed to get their helicopter. You see another helicopter here waiting for this one that's on the ground to leave so they can come in and land. And I want to show you one other thing in this photo. Here, not the photographer, in the background, there's people practicing social distancing. No, they're not social distancing. They're armed guards to prevent other Vietnamese people from rushing any of these planes. And don't think for one moment they wouldn't rush one of the planes. There's enough people on this ladder to bring it down, let alone get into that lonely helicopter. By the way, I think this scene is in the grounds of the United States Embassy in Saigon. Look at this. That airplane, that helicopter is actually in flight. It's airborne, and they're trying to scramble onto it. They don't care what the aircraft is going to do. Here's a mother that's already terrified because she knows that the machine gun operator is probably going to have to fire at something. But where are these helicopters going? They're going out to sea and landing on aircraft carriers. They're landing so fast they don't have time to refuel them. And they're pushing them overboard one by one. So the Paris Peace Accord failed. Canada was a member for 6 months. During that period of time, there were 18,000 ceasefire violations. But more significantly, there were 76,000 killed. South Vietnam struggled for survival, lasted another 21 months. And I understand the president of South Vietnam was given a liquor store in California. This is a horrific photograph. If you ever want to convince a political enemy to take your side, just show a photograph of children in serious pain, serious condition. And here's young Fan with some of her friends, all obviously in terror. They were playing in that area that's now all smoke or dust or whatever it is. I'm going to show you a photograph that was taken just before this one and a couple of photographs after this photograph. The latter could be a bit disturbing. The United States Air Force had dropped a napalm bomb, and that's where the kids were playing. And a few moments later, they were running out of the smoke and flames that were existing. Finally, they got to some individuals. I don't know if they were South Vietnamese or GIs, but you can see that Fan had quieted down by this point. Fan grew up. I believe she and her family live near Oshawa, but certainly in Ontario. From time to time, she gets work from the United Nations to deal with problems involving children and war. And now time goes by. I received this letter dated the 27th of December, 2013. That's 40 years later. And I saw it was from Jones. And in the small print, I saw under his name, Major General, United States Air Force, retired. And I thought, oh, good for old Jones. And I started reading. And the first line stated, today I was looking through a box of papers that belonged to my father. I didn't have to read it anymore. I looked back at the return address, and it wasn't Dave Jones. It was, Glenn Jones. It was Dwayne Jones, his son. And I thought, how's that possible? It was only last month I was in Vietnam. How could this guy join the Air Force, become a major general, and retire? I'm sure you've all experienced that, where 30 or 40 years seems like a month or a week. He goes on and he repeats word by word what I wrote on that yellow piece of paper. And he adds the remark, that note means a lot to me, and I believe you are the man who gave it to my father. Thank you for your kindness and your humanity. Seems to me the time has validated your perspective. And then he adds a note that his dad died in 1993. This is the son. Now, here's Fan again, and what she usually says when she meets veterans. I'll let you read it. I personally don't agree with her. I can't forgive my enemies. Oh, wait a minute now. I thought we were finished, but it's the woman in white. Remember the woman in white that I asked you to remember? I wanted you to know what happened to this passenger terminal, the most busiest airport in the world at that time. Here it is. But it's now called Ho Chi Minh Airport. Thank you for listening to me. I'm amazed I got everything through as fast as I did, and I'll certainly be prepared to take any questions. What's going on? How do I get out of here? Stop share. Okay, I've stopped sharing. I can't hear anybody talking.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Thank you very much, Mort, for a really powerful presentation. And questions? Anybody got any questions? Now is your time to do it. I think we're all overwhelmed. It was quite a powerful story, Mort.
I don't know how to raise my hand, so I apologize if I'm jumping in ahead of anyone else. Mort, you are an amazing human being. You are an amazing storyteller. That was extremely powerful, and I very much appreciate you sharing that with us. I've already sent a message to the current commanding officer of 436 Squadron, and as soon as this pandemic is done and over with, we're going to have you out to CFP Trenton, and we're going to have you tell the story to the guys, if that's okay with you.
That would be great.
We're looking forward to it already.
Any more questions? Let's see now.
Mort, I have a question. It's Alan here.
Go ahead.
The lady in white, can you just repeat, who is the lady in white?
Well, I'll tell you. The lady in white is, I don't know. I just wanted you to remember that setting of the passenger terminal.
Now I've got a question here from James Higginson Rowlands. He wants to know, where did you go after Bangkok?
after Bangkok.
That's what he's saying.
And we found our way home. I cannot remember, although I should check my logbook. I cannot remember if we did submissions on the way home.
All right. Mhm. No, I can't see any more questions.
I have a question. Hi, Uncle Mort. This is Bonnie. I'm very, very proud to be your grandniece and of all your accomplishments and of all the Canadians around the world. I just want to ask, you mentioned that you threw some parties in Bangkok in that hotel that was filled with spies. Did you overhear any juicy gossip?
Yes, of course, we heard all of their gossip, and we started to pick up on some of the codes, like Putin is thinking about sending some tanks into Bigistan. Thinking about means he's not going to do it. If the spy says Putin has ordered the tanks to be fueled and ready to go, means the attack is going to happen in 2 weeks. Stuff like that. It was extremely interesting. They joined all our parties. And another thing that happened to really embellish the fun and the excitement of that event was the Australians. They love touring Europe. And on the way home from Europe, they come through the Orient, and their last stop in the Orient is Bangkok. And by the time they get to Bangkok, they're broke. I and my crew we had discovered all the historic sites, and if you go on the bus, it was like 2 cents for a bus ride. For lunch, you could have a banana and a Coke for less than 10 cents. So we would take them to these places that they otherwise wouldn't have seen. But here we were with these Australian tourists who really filled out the hotel, and the intelligence officers, and our crew, and the buffet, and our own liquor bar. It was just an amazing combination. So that part of it was very easy. And Bonnie, it's good to hear you. Bonnie lives in the southern part of the United States.
Thank you, Uncle Mort. And Jeff's here too. We were both very proud of you.
Mort, my comment directed at Mort. Mort, what a wonderful, informative, eloquent presentation. I'm amazed at how you kept your record so up to date, most entertaining, and I'm sure the audience will agree with me. You did an outstanding job, and full marks to Mike Hoare and his team, Eric Morse and Patricia, for having got you to entertain us with your amazing experiences. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Kamal. And I apologize again about the hoarse throat. I don't know what happened, but I was certainly suffering with it.
It goes with the territory that you had a long run, and it comes as a result.
Yeah.
More.
Well,
Go ahead.
My message, or buried in it, was you can be very involved with agreements and international arrangements. Is it really worth the power it's printed on? You have to be so alert to what you're really dealing with. Are there hidden agendas and so on?
Tell me more. Did you stay in touch with any of your crew?
I'm sorry?
Your crew. Did you stay in touch with the members of your crew?
Regrettably not. We didn't. Regrettably not. We didn't expect these things to happen. I'm still in contact with, of all people, Dwayne Jones, the retired Major General of the Sun. He provided me the copy of that yellow piece of foolscap that I wrote out so quickly. I mean, we were anxious to get out of there. The crew were screaming at me, "What the hell are you doing writing a note to somebody?" Yeah. No time for a love letter.
Oh.
I have a couple of questions about the flight itself. Did you fly that plane all by itself across the Pacific, or were you escorted or part of a squadron?
No, we were all alone. We were all alone, and we used some interesting nav aids, especially on the flights over the Pacific. Um, do you happen to be, Jeremy, do you happen to be a navigator by any chance?
No, I'm a instrument rated pilot, but I can't navigate by stars if that's what you did.
Yeah, we did some of that, but more significantly, it was a good opportunity to navigate by what's called pressure pattern, by the pressure levels of the atmosphere. Because first of all, the lines that you see on the chart, you know, the high pressure and the low, the winds follow the direction of those lines. That's point one. If that's true, and you know that from this hour over the next 30 minutes, your altitude didn't change, then the pressure is the same, you have no drift. If you have no drift, you know your heading and your track. If there's a difference, depending upon your latitude and your airspeed, that you can calculate that difference equals 2 degrees, 5 degrees, or what have you. So you get one position line automatically using your pressure altimeter. Isn't that amazing?
It is. They didn't teach me that in flight school.
But you have to be over water.
Excuse me just a minute.
There's a little note here from Bill Thuma saying, excellent. Having been involved in that era as a Yankee, it brought back strong memories.
I'm
So
sure.
one of the guests. Now I've got another thing here. James Higginson Rollins wants to know, were you briefing the Canadian Embassy on the gossip?
No. Now, if you recall, when we talked about that part, and I said that I was suspicious of something, I believe that Major Dave Watson was given some special instructions. They were too liberal with the money and the liquor. He made it sound like it was a crew's idea to have a poolside party every night. He led us to believe it was our idea to get everybody gathered around and talk to them all. Whether he was in contact with the embassy from day to day, I don't know.
No.
I have my suspicion.
Any more questions? No? Yes, maybe? Well, that was a wonderful presentation. And it really was spellbinding and a real thriller of a story. You know, Hollywood should come after you for this. But anyway, at this time, I usually present our speaker with a gift as of appreciation. However, not possible. So just keep your eye out for Canada Post and they'll do the job for me. Now, I've got one announcement. Next Military History Night is scheduled for June the 16th. Speaker, RCMI member Gordon Lacko, and his presentation will be on the making of the movie Greyhound, based on the C.S. Forester novel, The Good Shepherd, which was set during the Battle of the Atlantic. Now, ladies and gentlemen, at the risk of repeating myself, which I am inclined to do so at times, there is simply no comparison to a first-hand account. There is no comparison to a first-hand account as we all witnessed this evening. Thank you very much, Mort, for sharing your story with you. Now I've got, I see a little note on the chat thing here from Diana Maddox. Just thank Mort directly for such an enlightening presentation, but think it's important to say, thank myself and the RCMI administration. Anyway, thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation and I appreciate you sharing your story with us. And maybe you'll come back and give us another story.
Well, there's more in the bag.
Yeah, good, good. Well, you've got more than one story. I know that for sure. But
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you very much. And I think I want to thank everybody who participated, and I now declare this meeting ended.
I think Art has a question.
Oh, go ahead, Art. Oh yeah, Art wants to say something. Go
I
ahead.
was afraid, I'm always afraid to ask questions because I feel like I'm sure Uncle Mort stated this very clearly and maybe I just missed this, which I often do. the plane that you developed this plan to take off with 200 people on it, secured by ropes and chains. Was that just a plan, or did you end up actually doing that?
No, we did not have to implement it. We're anticipating receiving the orders from Ottawa to do exactly that, but that never happened while we were there. And from the perspective of could we carry that number weight-wise? And the answer is yes. The weight was not a problem. It was the seating that we had the problem with.
Yeah, I wondered if those planes were used to carrying, really heavy military equipment. So I did wonder that as well, whether it could take another 100 people. I did have another technical question. Right at the beginning, you mentioned that the Vietnamese had this interesting ability to take apart factories, transport them on bicycles, reassemble them. I think they were munitions factories that you said they could bring really close to the front lines. Did that ever backfire on them?
Never.
I would think there would be reasons why you might not want to have a munitions factory really close to the front lines. Did that ever?
The Viet Cong was a clandestine operation. They sneaked under tunnels. They had to have this sort of equipment. So they had to move those little factories close to where they knew they had the boys that were going to go through the tunnels. So yes, it was used a lot. Did it backfire? Well, the Americans, as you saw, shelled a lot of locations. They bombed a lot of locations, napalm bombs. They probably wiped out a couple of those companies, but we don't know how many they had.
Yeah.
But later on, that was the Viet Minh. The next generation, the Viet Cong, used it extensively against the Americans.
Right. Thank you. Wonderful presentation. Thank you so much, Uncle Mort. Very proud.
Yeah, Mort, I want to
Thanks,
ask
Art.
you another question. You said you were exposed to Agent Orange. Have you had any medical repercussions as a result of that? I've read of so many,
Yes, I've had a lot of medical problems. And here's where politics come to play. The Americans, Department of Veterans Affairs, has said any US soldier that was in Vietnam between these dates, it's a given they were exposed to Agent Orange. They get every benefit possible for Agent Orange. I found the circular and the authority for that ruling in the States. And that was the period of time that my crew and I were in Vietnam. I made a petition to the Canadian government that because of the difficulties I've been having with most of my body organs, that in accordance with the American policy, I should be eligible to whatever the Canadian government can provide me with. The year before last, or maybe the year prior to that, I had 175 medical appointments. I've gone through a few difficulties.
Wow. Well, I tell you, I'm still reeling from that story. It's amazing. And thank you very much. I might add too that I've known Mort for a long time. I was the recording secretary for the Warriors Day Parade in Toronto, and Mort was the president of the Warriors Day Parade for a good many years. So we go back a long time. So thank you, Mort, for sharing. It was really a thriller of a story. My gosh.
It's the time of life. It's the time of life to give back. That's what it boils down to.
Yeah, that's right. Well, anyway, thank you very, very much. And I now declare this meeting ended. Thank you very much.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
There you go, Mart.
This has been another in our series of webcasts produced by the Royal Canadian Military Institute in Toronto as a public educational service. You can find news of upcoming events and links to our webcast archives at www.rcmi.org. On behalf of the RCMI, This is Eric Morse saying goodbye for now, and thank you for joining us.